For years, the sphere network has been dismissed as fringe speculation. But in 2025, new discoveries have pushed the debate into sharper focus. Patrick Jackson and others point to tunnel footage and unusual underground activity as signs of a hidden system at work, while critics caution that many of these claims still need independent verification. Jackson, for example, has circulated footage he believes depicts gray entities in subterranean spaces, though these remain highly contested and without government confirmation. Meanwhile, official planning documents show authorities themselves are adjusting priorities. The U.S. Space Force's 2025 AI and monitoring strategy outlined increased emphasis on orbital anomaly tracking. Combined with ongoing sightings of synchronized luminous spheres above critical sites, the discussion has shifted. What once sounded like speculation is now a field full of competing evidence and rising stakes. And the next step is to examine how this debate is reflected in the latest 2025 reports. The 2025 Sphere Network Update. The 2025 Sphere Network Update illustrates how much the conversation has shifted in the past 2 years. Independent trackers and mainstream coverage now point to a significant uptick in documented UAP and Orb reports since 2023. These are not just rumors circulating online, but include official case logs from aviation authorities, radar operators, and specialized analysts responsible for flight safety. Taken together, the consistent rise in documented incidents suggests that sightings are occurring more frequently and are being treated with greater seriousness by those tasked with monitoring the skies. Rather than a few isolated accounts, there is now a broader global picture forming. Analysts like Patrick Jackson have compiled datasets describing simultaneous observations across South America, Europe, and the Pacific. Whether drawn from pilot reports in controlled airspace, clustered sightings near military exercises, or ground teams logging repeated airborne patterns, these accounts all point to activity that transcends regional borders. Where earlier reporting could be dismissed as anecdotal, today's tallies across multiple continents reinforce the sense of something operating at planetary scale. Support for that perspective has grown as official agencies begin to echo some of the descriptions long kept within research circles. U.S. Space Force documents released in 2025 outlined an artificial intelligence-driven expansion of space domain awareness, a program explicitly designed to catalog orbital anomalies, track unidentified objects, and refine real-time monitoring across orbital layers. This terminology stops short of identifying luminous orbs, but it closely corresponds to the observations that independent researchers have cataloged over the last decade. Put simply, the same patterns that once appeared in civilian reports are now being studied in the same regions by official defense planners. Beyond the policy language, credible sources have underscored the repeating behaviors that make these sightings distinct. Media investigations and academics studying flight safety patterns have described formations that recurred with geometric precision, equilateral spacing, parallel arcs of movement, and synchronized pulsing across multiple altitudes. Such repeatability indicates a structured system rather than natural phenomena or chance alignments. When documented consistently, these patterns help explain why even cautious agencies have begun including orbital anomalies in their planning. What matters most is the question of intent. Data consistency shows that these objects are structured events, not weather interference or casual drone flights. They appear deliberately organized. Yet interpretation is where debate begins. One hypothesis sees a global surveillance system quietly observing human activity, tracking military operations and civil aviation with coverage so complete that almost nothing escapes notice. Another hypothesis frames the network as a protective infrastructure, perhaps maintaining an orbiting grid to detect or deflect environmental or cosmic hazards before they reach Earth's atmosphere. Neither reading has been conclusively proven, which leaves investigators with possibilities rather than answers. The correlation between periods of human activity and heightened sightings only sharpens that ambiguity. When war games ramp up, or when satellite constellations rapidly multiply, reports of sphere formations climb. During calmer intervals, they lessen in visibility but never vanish. The system does not switch off, it adapts. These fluctuations show that the network can respond to human conditions, yet they do not reveal whether its role is adversarial or protective. Observers remain caught between the possibilities of surveillance and guardianship. What heightens this puzzle is the contrast between familiar aerospace behavior and what the data shows. Here, meteor streaks fragment unpredictably, while spheres maintain steady geometries. Conventional satellites reflect sunlight briefly before fading from view, yet recorded orbs hold position for extended periods or track aircraft for long distances. Instrument arrays catch radiation emissions consistent with directed energy, but cannot identify any terrestrial origin. The sum total points toward phenomena that operate according to a logic outside of ordinary aerospace function. Patrick Jackson once argued that the sphere network functions as a planetary defense grid, and his terminology was long considered a stretch. But in 2025, with a broader set of government papers addressing space domain awareness, and with public incidents mounting, the conversation no longer centers on whether spheres exist. The necessary question now becomes how to interpret their function. Researchers wrestle with whether to model the system as engineered infrastructure or as something altogether alien in architecture. The persistence of repeated forms across different cultures and continents has elevated the debate from niche speculation to one of mainstream concern. For those following closely, the character of the sightings remains critical. The formations exhibit layered architecture, with groupings recurring at different ranges above the Earth. Triangular patterns, concentric spacing, and tiered arrangements suggest design rather than chaos. Structured geometry is not just difficult to dismiss, it is almost impossible to attribute to accident. The conclusion reached by many analysts is that what we are monitoring is coordinated, precise, and engineered toward a long-term purpose. Where this leaves official agencies is complicated. Civil aviation investigators want to ensure flight paths remain safe, while defense planners cannot ignore repeated incursions into sensitive corridors. Yet without definitive proof of benign or hostile intention, the response remains limited to cataloging and observation. Civilian researchers have pressed for stronger disclosure, especially following the UAP Disclosure Fund's 2025 Capitol Hill briefing, where former intelligence officers testified that additional transparency could unlock technical and scientific breakthroughs. The momentum for disclosure continues to grow, but so does the uncertainty of what deeper recognition might reveal. So the 2025 update is less about confirmation of existence and more about shifting responsibility. Civilian observers, academic analysts, and now national defense planners all converge on a shared conclusion. The phenomena are persistent, measurable, and organized. What diverges is how to label that system. Surveillance mechanism? Defense infrastructure? Experimental artificial intelligence deployed beyond Earth? Each frame has different consequences, yet they all acknowledge the same structured presence. As the reports accumulate, one fact becomes unavoidable. Visibility breeds clarity, and clarity demands explanation. The sphere network may no longer be a term used by officials, but the descriptions embedded in official strategies line up neatly with the language long used by independent researchers. The gap is narrowing, even if consensus remains distant. Understanding the way the network actually functions, the mechanics that keep it synchronized in the sky, the layers at which it operates, and the techniques it might employ to maintain such precision, has become the next priority for anyone trying to make sense of the phenomena. That is the point where the story now turns. How the sphere network operates. When researchers attempt to explain not just what is seen in the sky but how it functions, the most widely cited model comes from Patrick Jackson. His framework divides sightings into three types, organized in layers stacked above one another. Many independent investigators have adopted this classification because it organizes otherwise scattered observations into something resembling a system. It is worth noting, however, that government agencies such as ARO have not officially endorsed this terminology. Within official reports, the three-tier model remains only a hypothesis circulated in research circles. According to Jackson's model, the lowest layer is Type 3, appearing at or near the ground. Witnesses often describe these spheres hovering silently near vehicles, gliding over lakes, or suspended just above treetops. Their movements give the impression of scanning or probing specific locations rather than drifting without purpose. Unlike short-lived flashes or reflections, these remain visible long enough to be recorded from multiple angles, strengthening the case that they are not tricks of light. The mid-layer, Type 2, operates across treetop height up toward the lower edge of orbit. Reports compiled over wide regions show the same formations tracked simultaneously across dozens of kilometers. In particular, pilots have logged Type 2 spheres pacing alongside their aircraft. Military flights sometimes record them closely tailing exercises, while routine commercial flights on the same corridors often pass unnoticed. Many researchers interpret this midlayer as a relay network, bridging signals and control between ground-level interactions and the higher architecture above. Type 1 represents the most distant and visually dramatic arrangements. These spheres typically appear in triangular groupings or wider V-shaped patterns in orbital space, starkly distinct from cataloged satellites or stellar formations. When tracked, their geometries line up in ways that strongly resemble engineered constellations. The broad triangles expand or contract in proportion to an observed target's distance, much like surveyors adjusting their measuring base. Many observers believe these formations act as coordination hubs, anchoring the entire layered structure that spans from ground level to the edge of orbit. The simplest way to picture this architecture is to think of it as echoing familiar communication networks. Type 3 behaves like local sensors, operating close to the surface. Type 2 acts like regional relays, stitching together wider coverage. Type 1 occupies the coordinate hubs above, where the system can oversee entire regions at once. It mirrors the way cell towers, data relays, and satellites line up in our own infrastructure, only here it appears to function seamlessly and on a planetary scale. Analysts have observed that these spheres often fix themselves in equidistant geometric spacing, forming patterns that correspond to trilateration mathematics. This is the same principle underpinning modern GPS and mobile tracking. 3 or more points combine to lock the position of a target. Jackson and several mathematicians who have modeled these arrangements argue that this geometric consistency points to a positioning or targeting function on Earth's surface and in near-Earth airspace. Not everyone agrees, but the repeated appearance of these geometries suggests more than random placement. Where the resemblance to communication technology becomes more technical is in the energy signatures detected during sightings. Researchers including Jackson, independent sensor specialists such as Jim Segala, and teams working near reported hotspots have documented microwave bursts coincident with sphere appearances. These bursts occur in frequency ranges used by advanced scanning and communication systems. They are not always stable readings, but the consistency of their timing raises the possibility that this is how the system transmits or maintains its connections. Alongside microwave emissions, some teams have recorded short gamma radiation spikes in areas of activity, especially at ground level. These signatures differ from steady cosmic rays, as they are brief and localized. Environmental monitors have picked up flashes aligned with reported sightings rather than random background radiation. While the overall radiation levels tend to decline quickly, the correlation has led several researchers to suggest these byproducts are part of the sphere's operating mechanics rather than natural phenomena coinciding by chance. Such claims remain debated, yet they hint at an energetic process occurring beneath the visible surface of the lighted orb itself. Still, it is important to recognize pushback against these interpretations. Government scientists, including those in ARO, have acknowledged receiving and cataloging UAP reports but remain cautious. In their public statements, they have said they have not identified verifiable evidence of extraterrestrial technology. For that reason, the trilateration or targeting model should be considered one possible hypothesis rather than a confirmed mechanism. The resemblance to our networks may be remarkable, but resemblance is not proof of intent. If we accept the working hypothesis, the system appears capable of both upward and downward communication. Type 3 spheres gathering data at the surface would transfer signals upward through Type 2 relays and into coordinating Type 1 grids. At the same time, bursts of microwave energy suggest information may also flow back down, perhaps issuing commands or adjustments. This bidirectional flow would allow the network to operate with redundancy. If one node disappears, others maintain the chain, ensuring that coverage remains intact. This resilience would make the array functional in ways our own terrestrial networks only approximate today. Witnesses exposed at close range sometimes report dizziness, nausea, or temporary disorientation while near these spheres. Jackson and others theorize that what people experience may be a byproduct of microwave or gamma emissions rather than deliberate targeting. The physiological overlap with accounts from paranormal and abduction cases adds another layer of complexity. While it remains speculative, these effects imply that the system does more than passively observe. It may unintentionally or deliberately shape conditions around it. From an investigative standpoint, the consistency across thousands of accounts forces attention. We see layers interlocking in a structured way, bursts that suggest active signaling, and geometries that map onto mathematical patterns used in advanced positioning. From ground to orbit, the behaviors align too closely with a working system to dismiss as coincidence. Whether it is surveillance, defense infrastructure, or something else entirely remains unresolved. The debate then shifts less around whether the layers exist, they are repeatedly observed, and more around what they signify. Our engineers constructed towers, relays, and satellites to guarantee coverage across Earth. The spheres appear to echo the same solution, though executed in ways still outside human capability. Similar principles appear at work, but on a scale and with an elegance that suggests a technology built to integrate seamlessly across the entire planet. This layered framework provides a foundation for thinking about the spheres as structured nodes in a network. But a lingering question arises. If the architecture extends downward and upward, where does the real control point lie? Observing the sky gives us one perspective. The next step is to examine whether traces on the ground, or beneath it, might complete the picture of how this system operates. Underground clues and tunnel discoveries. In 2025, discussion of the sphere network widened beyond aerial events when the focus turned to what investigators were uncovering beneath the surface. While skies remain the stage for luminous orbs and layered geometries, extensive tunnel systems came to light in Utah, central Turkey, and remote stretches of Argentina. Equipped with ground-penetrating radar and updated survey techniques, research teams reported vast underground corridors not tied to any known archaeological record. Some stretched for miles, following straight, deliberate lines that did not resemble the uneven shapes of natural caves. Their construction hinted at deliberate design. Utah contained segments appearing reinforced for long-term resilience. Turkey revealed arched ceilings with industrial precision, and Argentina presented vertical shafts that opened into grid-like nodes suggestive of entry points rather than accidental fissures. Note, law enforcement also confirmed highly engineered cross-border tunnels in 2025 along the U.S.-Mexico border, some nearly 3,000 feet in length, designed by smugglers for criminal use. These are verifiable and documented by Customs and Border Protection. They illustrate how sophisticated underground engineering can result from human activity. It is important not to conflate those findings with more speculative claims about ultraterrestrial installations. Theories linking undocumented tunnels in Utah, Turkey, or Argentina to the sphere network come largely from independent investigators and have not been validated by government science agencies. Reports from Jackson's team described scorched bands along the walls of several tunnel sites. In some cases, the stone was fused into hardened layers that appeared altered by intense heat. Laboratory tests noted unusual heat-altered characteristics, but no consensus exists on an origin. Independent geological reviews have not confirmed an anthropogenic or non-industrial energy source, and some geologists argue that rare but natural thermal or geological processes could explain these features. Alongside these scorched surfaces, Jackson has pointed to scattered metallic flecks embedded in the walls. His team described the samples as magnetically active and distinct from common mining residues. While these claims add intrigue, further peer-reviewed examination remains necessary before drawing firm conclusions about their significance. The similarities observed across regions, the scorched walls, metallic traces, and geometric passageways, prompted questions about whether these systems share more than coincidence. If they are not natural formations, their consistent features across continents suggest either a hidden multinational initiative or potentially something even less conventional. Yet here again experts caution restraint. Human infrastructure, from ancient underground dwellings in Cappadocia to modern smuggling tunnels, shows how engineering underground passages is well within our known capabilities. Jackson's interpretation frames these anomalies as possible evidence of embedded infrastructure tied to the sphere network, but official bodies have not accepted that conclusion. The most controversial material has been video evidence circulated by Jackson and his collaborators. In early 2025, his team released enhanced footage from exploratory cameras positioned in Utah passages. The recordings show what they interpret as tall, smooth figures moving through the corridors. The entities appear elongated, matte in surface texture, and, distinct from the archetypal gray, imagery familiar from older UFO lore. More striking is the reported distortion in the footage. Frames seem inconsistent, as if time around the figure flexed slightly. Jackson interprets this as evidence of localized time distortion effects produced by advanced technology. However, these recordings have not been independently corroborated by third-party forensic laboratories or confirmed by government review. Without such verification, they remain disputed claims rather than established fact. Comparable reports emerged from separate expeditions in Turkey and Argentina. In each, the recordings depict a figure of similar proportions appearing to move without regard for the presence of the filming teams. In Argentina, one recording shows the figure briefly turning toward the camera before continuing onward without evident reaction. The consistency of these descriptions across distant sites makes the footage compelling for research groups who already favor the ultraterrestrial hypothesis. Yet scientists outside those circles emphasize the risks of interpreting light distortions or sensor errors as proof of non-human entities. Without rigorous validation, the possibility of technical artifacts or misinterpretation cannot be dismissed. If considered under Jackson's framework, the appearance of anomalous figures within tunnel networks would support a model in which the visible spheres above ground are only one layer of a much larger system. In this speculative model, subterranean nodes could represent hidden control centers, with the aerial orbs acting as the visible output of commands relayed from below. Energy appears to dissipate upward, visible as surface phenomena, while the actual infrastructure remains concealed underground. This offers a potential explanation for why certain regions have persistent sphere activity. If underground installations exist beneath them, then what observers see could be only the surface component of a deeper system. This hypothesis draws strength from the apparent overlap in surface events and subterranean anomalies. Many clusters of sphere sightings occur in areas where strange underground features or unexplained tunnels are alleged to exist. In Jackson's interpretation, scorched markings could reflect channels directing energy upward, metallic residues might be maintenance traces from equipment, and figures moving within the tunnels could serve roles akin to technicians. However, geological institutions, aerospace agencies, and government panels emphasize caution. None of these links have been verified through controlled study. Overlaying this with known patterns of surface sightings adds another layer of speculation. Periods of heightened aerial activity often coincide with proximity to nuclear facilities, aerospace test zones, or major energy corridors. If underground nodes were located near such critical infrastructure, this could explain why spheres congregate in those skies. Yet again, without hard data confirming structures beneath those sites, the theory remains conjectural. The overlap might simply reflect where human monitoring is highest, leading to more reports in the first place. Independent experts stress that without repeatable measurements, coincidence cannot be ruled out. Because criminal tunnels are real and documented, it is important not to collapse categories. Ultraterrestrial interpretations are claims that require more evidence, while smugglers' tunnels represent confirmed human construction. Keeping these distinctions clear is essential if the discussion is to remain credible. As of 2025, underground evidence tied directly to the sphere phenomena exists only in the claims of independent researchers and in contested footage. There is no official acknowledgement of subterranean bases. The fact that footage and samples are debated does not negate their importance. It simply places them in the category of unresolved anomalies. What these discoveries and claims do provide is a sharper frame for future investigation. The possibility of underground infrastructure, whether natural, human, or something not yet understood, shifts the discussion away from a purely aerial mystery. Even if the boldest interpretations remain unproven, the correlation between reported tunnels, scorched surfaces, unexplained metallic traces, and disputed footage points researchers toward the ground as much as the skies. Scientists, journalists, and security agencies will continue to weigh competing interpretations, aware that misattribution could either inflate myths or overlook genuine discoveries. The result is that the sphere network debate now occupies two arenas, above in the form of luminous geometries, and below in the form of contested tunnels and rumored entities. Each claim requires its own level of scrutiny, and each layer introduces another question about whether the phenomenon is organized from hidden points of control. And while the evidence remains divided between confirmed human activity and unverified anomalies, it prompts a larger question. If neither spheres nor tunnels are random, where should observers focus when charting the next stage of inquiry? This is where the discussion moves again from individual cases to larger patterns. The tunnels raise suspicions about hidden infrastructure, but the broader question remains: do appearances of the spheres themselves distribute without order, or do they follow recognizable global logic? That line of inquiry is where the investigation next leads. Global hotspot mapping in 2025. In 2025, charting where spheres appear became just as central as analyzing how they behave. Researchers began layering sightings into detailed maps, and those overlays brought forward recurring hotspots that caught serious attention. Rather than random lights scattered over the planet, these maps suggested points of concentration. The strongest indications appeared where human infrastructure or defense activity was already most intense. Analysts like Patrick Jackson argue this reflects intentional positioning of the network, though official agencies stop short of confirming that conclusion. Independent trackers caution that clusters are observable, but that patterns should not be mistaken for direct causation until verified. One frequent point of focus is nuclear infrastructure. Jackson and other researchers have highlighted recurring sightings near nuclear reactors and storage facilities, from Eastern Europe's aging Soviet-era plants to sites in the American Midwest and coastal Japan. In some reports, Type 2 orbs were described hovering over facilities shortly after spikes in output or scheduled activity, pulsing and retreating as if executing a sweep. Jackson presents this as a predictive correlation, but outside observers note that while coincidental timing is suggestive, it is not definitive proof. Independent mapping datasets do show higher incidence of reports near nuclear sites compared with rural baselines, yet causation, whether monitoring, detection, or unrelated clustering, remains unproven. Energy grids are another recurring feature of reported mapping data. Multiple witnesses and independent logs describe Type 2 and Type 3 spheres near large substations and high-capacity transmission corridors. Cities including Sao Paulo, Kiev, and Manila have documented glowing orbs aligning above or near transformer complexes. Sometimes the formations match the geometry of the power lines themselves, resembling chains parallel to lattice structures. Again, Jackson has argued that this reflects monitoring of energy distribution or even tapping of energy directly. More cautious reviews acknowledge that the sightings align with concentrated infrastructure zones, but stress that no physical evidence yet links the objects to deliberate interaction with grid systems. The correlation is enough to warrant more formal study, but the interpretation remains debated. A third notable correlation emerges in aerospace testing regions. Data circulating among researchers shows recurrent clusters of sightings around proving grounds and missile test corridors. In Nevada, accounts describe spheres appearing near restricted ranges at hours when experimental flights are believed to occur. In Kazakhstan, observers highlighted spheres hovering in the vicinity of recently built launch sites. In the Pacific, clusters of Type 1 orbs were logged during known missile trials. Jackson interprets these alignments as clear signs of a network observing and sometimes anticipating aerospace activities. Media coverage has echoed some of these reports, but, again, governmental validation is lacking. The pattern is striking, but attribution of motive, surveillance, interference, or coincidence remains unresolved. Brazil represents one of the strongest examples in Jackson's mapping work. His datasets from 2025 highlight dense activity concentrated along the Amazon basin's hydroelectric installations. Recurring Type 3 sightings were logged by farmers and dam operators, some of whom noted minor electrical disturbances or instrument irregularities. Along the southern coast, sightings described objects appearing to track aircraft, consistent with Type 2 behavior. Jackson stresses the uniform spacing observed across energy routes, interpreting this as deliberate network positioning. Independent mappers verify that Brazil has generated unusually high numbers of reports compared with South American neighbors, but they stop short of endorsing his system-wide interpretation. Eastern Europe presents a different emphasis. Reports cluster heavily near nuclear and military infrastructure, particularly in Ukraine and Belarus. Jackson's maps highlight arcs of spheres forming repeated formations around Soviet-era bunkers or regions where conflict activity heightened. Radar traces have occasionally picked up small, luminous objects holding formation despite commercial traffic nearby. Independent datasets do confirm elevated reporting across contested regions of Eastern Europe, though many sightings lack verifiable instrumentation. Analysts point out that conflict areas often generate more attention and more sensors, which itself could inflate visibility. While Jackson interprets it as strategic monitoring, others caution that a high-noise environment complicates direct attribution. The Pacific represents one of the broadest mapping puzzles. Here, Jackson's model identifies arcs of Type 2 and occasional Type 1 activity aligned with shipping lanes, missile defense zones, and major naval staging areas. Hawaii, Guam, and regions between the Philippines and Papua New Guinea each produced reports of spheres appearing during or shortly after exercises. Some civilian sailors described orbs hovering silently above shipping corridors following drills. Jackson has compared this to a defense grid shadowing maritime and aerospace arteries. Official confirmation is lacking, but multiple datasets do record above-average sightings across military transit routes in the Pacific Theater. An additional claim, also linked to Jackson and echoed in media coverage, asserts that in conflict zone spheres have not only appeared but allegedly intercepted or neutralized rockets. Accounts from the Middle East and other contested regions describe luminous orbs approaching projectiles in flight. A handful of videos circulate online that some interpret as documentation of these events. However, no government agency has issued independent confirmation of such intercept capabilities, and official reports avoid mentioning them. Researchers handling these claims call them anecdotal and unresolved, while Jackson views them as evidence of an active defense system. The stories illustrate how contested and politically sensitive this mapping work becomes once military implications are suggested. What begins to emerge when all the maps are combined is not randomness, but clustering near significant nodes of energy, infrastructure, and weaponry. Overlaying reported sightings shows dense activity around nuclear set UPS, energy feeds, aerospace test corridors, and geopolitical flashpoints. Independent data collectors agree that these clusters are worth examining, though they emphasize that correlation alone does not prove control or intent. Jackson interprets the overlay as direct evidence of system coordination, but outside reviews position it instead as a series of compelling patterns awaiting harder forensic analysis. The Brazil, Eastern Europe, and Pacific examples together underline how patterns adapt to local conditions. Hydroelectric corridors in one region, old bunkers in another, and staging areas across the ocean. Each case raises the same question: whether the orbs are responding reactively to human activity, or whether their presence signifies an anticipatory system already in place. From an investigative perspective, the takeaway is not confirmation, but grounds for continued monitoring. Consolidated into a visual heat map, the data presents a structure that some see as resembling layered oversight. Jackson's classification fits this image neatly. Low-level Type 3 clusters near ground infrastructure, Type 2 swaths spanning transit corridors, and high-altitude Type 1 arcs aligned with orbital paths. This structure could be read as surveillance, as monitoring, or as a predictive defense web toggling coverage in advance of events. The interpretation depends on the framework applied, and consensus remains far off. What is less disputed is that when mapped in 2025, the reported sightings produce recurring hotspots significant enough to compel attention. For researchers, the mapping brings a cautious payoff. Rather than isolated anecdotes, the overlay creates clusters that repeat and return, often timed with human activity. Jackson's interpretation leans toward intentional oversight, but even critics grant that the clustering merits sustained scrutiny. The phrase repeated by independent analysts is that the datasets justify transparent, multidisciplinary study before stronger claims can stand. Overlaying reported sightings produces recurring clusters near energy and strategic nodes, compelling enough to merit further transparent, forensic analysis by independent scientists. As this global mapping work circulated in 2025, its implications began to reach official ears. Analysts debated what counted as correlation, while policymakers confronted the growing pressure of public datasets layered across critical infrastructure. It was within this climate that new official statements emerged from high-level defense circles, raising difficult questions about what kind of phenomena were already being tracked at orbital scale. Space Force disclosures and quiet admissions. In the first half of 2025, the Space Force began circulating updates that, on the surface, appeared routine. These briefings were framed as part of ongoing space awareness initiatives, but close readers noticed unusual terminology. Where earlier documents spoke exclusively of debris, adversarial satellites, or meteorological interference, official sources now referenced orbital anomalies and the pressing need to improve anomaly detection. The language was cautious, deliberately neutral, and avoided any reference to spheres. Still, the shift implied recognition that not all interference in orbit could be explained away by familiar categories of clutter or adversary activity. This change in vocabulary coincided with the release of a major internal directive, the Space Force FI 2025 Data and Artificial Intelligence Strategic Action Plan, published on March 19, 2025. In this roadmap, AI integration was framed as the backbone of the service's future operations. The plan was structured around 4 central lines of effort: building stronger data and AI governance across the enterprise, establishing a culture of digital fluency among personnel, rapidly adopting advanced analytics and machine learning across missions, and strengthening partnerships with industry, government, and international allies. Officially, these efforts align with maintaining superiority in space through enhanced detection of debris, satellites, and hypersonic threats. Yet the urgency conveyed pointed towards something more: an environment dense with anomalies requiring real-time processing well beyond traditional catalogs and tracking models. The logic of the plan raises a direct question: what exactly is being collected that demands a leap toward broad autonomy? Standard debris monitoring follows predictable orbital paths and statistical models. But structured alignments, objects pulsing across multiple layers, or geometric formations shifting suddenly in skies and orbital space, defy those models. If observations included phenomena of that complexity, then only advanced AI could manage thousands of incoming signals, images, and readings at operational speed. By 2025, the Space Force was not only planning for AI support, but mandating AI literacy across its workforce. That signal, while wrapped in bureaucratic language, is difficult to misinterpret. It suggests an expectation of encountering anomalies that present complex, repeatable patterns unrelated to ordinary hardware. Beyond documents, accounts from outside observers suggest a quiet operational reality. Locals in a Utah valley, an area long associated with repeated Type 3 sightings around power infrastructure, described unmarked aircraft touching down under cover of night. What caught the attention of residents was the sudden appearance of teams who deployed portable radar arrays and monitoring stations before disappearing the next morning. Later, the uniforms were tentatively identified as matching Space Force issue. The timing was striking. Citizen logs recorded fresh orb activity on the same grid within hours of those deployments. These stories do not constitute formal confirmation, but the overlap was difficult for witnesses to dismiss. In Argentina, the pattern appeared once more. A group exploring a shaft near reported underground anomalies captured video of both hovering luminous spheres and military personnel establishing a perimeter in the days that followed. Citizen journalists cross-referenced footage and insignia, suggesting these individuals resembled Space Force guardians, even though no official mission was declared in Argentina at the time. Reports from Turkey told a similar tale. Residents in Cappadocia documented both structured orbs and triangular formations and unfamiliar convoys entering the region. Among the equipment were identifiable markings hinting at U.S. Space Force origin. In each of these countries, the official record remained silent. But the repeated presence of personnel consistent with Space Force operations created a body of circumstantial alignment that lent credibility to observers connecting deployments with anomalous activity. It is important to add caution here. These claims come from citizen footage, witness testimony, and independent filmmakers who track these events. Officials have not confirmed that formal Space Force missions took place on the ground. Yet when considered alongside the adoption of AI strategies emphasizing anomaly detection, the cumulative effect of these sightings forms a coherent picture. Even the phrasing in the FI 2025 Action Plan, calling for rapid machine learning adoption to process vast incoming datasets from both terrestrial and orbital sensors, feeds into this impression. It acknowledges that the monitoring operation now faces an environment filled with signals outside the scope of conventional aerospace patterns. The plan also broadened the scope of partnerships, explicitly mentioning links to commercial providers. High-resolution imagery and communication networks from companies such as Iridium, Inmarsat, and Starlink were identified as redundancy channels for defense use. On paper, this is about resilient communications and persistent surveillance. But from another angle, it underscores that commercial channels, already capturing unexplained objects in their own feeds, are feeding into Pentagon systems. The quiet absorption of private streams into official anomaly detection aggregates public and classified data under the same roof. By 2025, this made the Space Force the central clearinghouse of unexplained orbital information, even while carefully avoiding blunt terminology that others, like Jackson, have tied to the sphere network. This duality of phrasing, official denial in language, but expansive preparation in practice, continues to stand out. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, in congressional hearings, repeated its position that no verifiable evidence of extraterrestrial activity has been discovered. That public statement is categorical. It delineates the official boundary between ongoing monitoring and extraordinary claims. And yet, behaviors run parallel to the caution. Field units appearing near sites of documented anomalies, a national strategy directing every service member toward AI readiness, and a more integrated role for commercial surveillance all suggest treatment of anomalies as operational realities. What is denied in formal testimony appears quietly addressed through planning and posture. For civilian witnesses, this contrast becomes the defining impression. People recorded teams on the ground at sites of repeated sphere sightings, and in doing so, they interpreted a tacit confirmation. If the government spends manpower and material establishing temporary detection hubs in remote valleys and unexplored shafts, then the logic is simple. The events matter. Whether identified as extraterrestrial, foreign adversarial, or unexplained anomalies, the phenomenon is being met with applied resources. This is the quiet admission concealed in operational details. Taken together, the implications are significant. A defense establishment adapting doctrine around orbital anomalies, pivoting its core cultural training around AI readiness, embedding with commercial communication networks, and allegedly deploying in silence to international hotspots paints a consistent outline. Officials need not acknowledge the term sphere network to demonstrate de facto recognition of something coordinated at orbital and atmospheric levels. Instead, they position themselves to absorb, process, and respond. Where this reality leads is less about the detection itself and more about interpretation. The driving question is no longer whether the anomalies exist. They are being resourced, monitored, and integrated into daily operations. The pressing issue is how they should be understood, as unpredictable clutter, adversarial experiments, or a structured system unlike anything in our arsenal. And, as with all questions of monitoring, the issue inevitably turns from the mechanics of tracking to the motives of what is being tracked. That uncertainty shifts the debate toward a deeper dilemma waiting just ahead: the protection versus surveillance debate. The central dilemma now confronting researchers is whether the sphere network functions as a protective shield or an intrusive mechanism of control. The two interpretations are not mutually exclusive, and both have drawn considerable evidence, though often evidence that is disputed, debated, and still awaiting verification. Since 2024, the accumulation of reports has forced both perspectives into sharper focus and exposed the possibility that the system may operate simultaneously in both roles. On one side, observers point to incidents in which the spheres appear to intervene during moments of cosmic risk. On the other side, exposure to smaller, ground-level manifestations has been linked to illness, radiation spikes, and disturbing behavioral effects interpreted as attempts to move or manipulate people. Between these extremes lies the uncomfortable possibility that what looks like protection on a planetary scale may feel like surveillance or coercion in everyday human spaces. Supporters of the protective interpretation often cite accounts where spheres coincided with disappearing orbital objects. Some amateur astronomers described medium-sized fragments brightening and then vanishing with no residual debris trail during Earth's passage through asteroid streams. Hours later, telescope feeds captured configurations of luminous orbs aligned at the same altitude. To skeptics, it could be coincidence, but to proponents, these flashes suggest intervention, possibly energy discharges that destroyed or deflected incoming hazards. Patrick Jackson has argued that these alignments represent Type 1 or Type 2 formations neutralizing fragments before they entered lower atmosphere. Some video snippets circulating online also show brief flares followed by stable luminous points in nearby formation. Yet it must be stressed that these reports remain contested. Observers disagree on interpretation, and no independent government agency has confirmed active interception. At best, these accounts provide circumstantial hints, not scientific proof, of a defensive function. If the defense narrative is difficult to confirm, the surveillance narrative has its own problematic weight, but it rests upon more measurable human effects. In houses long associated with haunted activity, glowing spheres are often reported hovering inside rooms or moving along corridors. Jackson has long contended that these so-called Type 3 spheres produce microwave and gamma bursts. The physical sensations associated with encounters, headaches, dizziness, nausea, temporary disorientation, and in some cases longer-lasting cognitive impairment, mirror the known consequences of high-energy exposure. As unsettling as it sounds, ordinary poltergeist events like banging doors or inexplicable fires may serve as diversionary tactics, steering people out of emission zones rather than supernatural tricks. Additional input came from scientist Jim Segala, who deployed sensor arrays in buildings reporting paranormal activity. His instruments registered short microwave and occasional gamma spikes during those events. Jackson and Segala interpreted these results as evidence that sphere emissions coincide with physical disturbances, though the broader scientific community stresses that correlation must not be confused with causation. These findings remain preliminary and require peer-reviewed studies before they can be accepted as proven mechanisms. Part of the intrigue comes from the historical shift in reported effects. Older cases of so-called spontaneous human combustion, where individuals were found burned under mysterious conditions, have declined noticeably after 2019. Instead, anecdotal reports grew of subtler but widespread interference, nausea, fatigue, headaches, and small localized fires. Jackson interprets this as evidence of a system update, a recalibration toward less lethal outputs. In his words, this looked like a software patch, where catastrophic incidents were suppressed while subtler behavioral steering became the norm. But here again, the limitations are clear. There is no validated evidence of any upgrade. What exists is an interpretive hypothesis that aligns with shifts in anecdotal case profiles. Many scientists outside Jackson's circle argue that the apparent decline of combustion reports could have mundane explanations, from reporting bias to over-attribution in past decades. Thus, the patch remains speculation rather than demonstrated fact. Still, the timing of increased radiation-linked illness after 2024 has drawn serious concern. Hospitals located near known hotspot regions registered clusters of unexplained cases. Patients presented with fatigue, vomiting, dizziness, or skin irritation despite no recorded chemical spills, industrial accidents, or nuclear leaks. When mapped alongside logged sightings, striking overlaps appeared. Jackson saw this as clear indication of emission events. Independent researchers acknowledged the overlap but emphasized that without detailed dosage data or controlled exposure studies, the link cannot be confirmed. It remains possible that heightened awareness simply drives clustering of unrelated symptoms around highly publicized phenomena. Nevertheless, the pattern is difficult to ignore, and it strengthens the perception of the spheres as more than harmless watchers. This duality, seemingly shielding Earth from hazards while leaving behind radiation sickness and disturbing domestic experiences, sits at the heart of the protection versus surveillance debate. On a large scale, the sphere network appears to operate with agency that benefits the planet as a whole. On a smaller scale, the same mechanisms can damage individuals, forcing them from specific spaces or altering their physical state. Jackson frames this as proof of a system designed with priorities that simply do not place human well-being first. When people interfere with maintenance zones or stray too close to transmission points, the consequence is not negotiation but forced removal by intimidation, illness, or fear. Protection of Earth in the aggregate may come at the cost of individual autonomy. Cultural interpretation further complicates the matter. Groups long engaged in paranormal study view what they once labeled hauntings through this newer framework. If doors slam and objects move, perhaps these are not playful ghosts but automated behaviors designed to reroute living beings. If localized fires ignite without apparent cause, perhaps they are side effects of radiation bursts rather than supernatural judgment. This reframing strips away the mythical, but leaves the experience no less disturbing. A mechanical force indifferent to human presence can still inspire fear, and can still manipulate actions. Health data makes the debate more tangible because it introduces measurable readings. Multiple independent teams noted gamma or microwave fluctuations in precisely the buildings where poltergeist stories were strongest. Some documented bursts coinciding with witness accounts of knocking or moving objects. The overlap is sufficient to suggest a correlation, but it does not establish direct causality. Researchers beyond Jackson and Segala urge caution in interpreting the data. Instruments are sensitive, bursts may have alternative explanations, and replication is still lacking. Still, the fact that measurements exist at all elevates the conversation from pure anecdote to contested science. Taken together, the two interpretations refuse to collapse into one. The same system that might obliterate an asteroid trajectory invisibly before impact could also ignite a small flame in someone's home to drive them away. It is not a matter of benevolence versus malice, but of function. A system designed without regard for human preference could easily appear as both protector and intruder. If the grid shields the planet broadly but incidentally harms individuals in its upkeep, we are left with a paradox. Benefit at one scale, interference at another. Understanding this paradox is crucial for framing how humanity should think about the sphere network. If protection functions are real, then our survival may partly depend on them. If control functions are equally real, then everyday people live under subtle coercion, shaped by forces they did not agree to and cannot avoid. This reality challenges us to ask what role we occupy, as beneficiaries under an umbrella, or as subjects inside an uninvited monitoring lattice. The evidence is still uneven, and many claims, asteroid intervention, gamma bursts linked to sickness, declines in combustion cases, lack definitive validation. But their consistency across reports fuels the debate rather than ending it. Perhaps the most sobering possibility is that the system itself perceives no contradiction. Deflection of external hazards and redirection of human populations may be different outputs of one operational design. What looks like contradiction to us may appear as unified purpose to the network. These are not abstract philosophical questions. They are pragmatic uncertainties with consequences for survival, health, and autonomy. The unresolved issue is not whether the spheres exist, they are catalogued, tracked, and repeatedly witnessed, but how we should interpret their purpose. If the same presence protects Earth while impairing its people, how should humanity position itself in response? Is cooperation even relevant when intent remains speculative? Or does prudent caution demand preparation for both rescue and restraint? These questions matter not only for understanding the network, but also for considering what lies beyond it. Because if the system functions both as shield and control, then we must ask, shield against what? Protection carries meaning only if a larger threat exists beyond the horizon. And in 2025, with Earth's skies filled with more transmissions and satellites than ever before, that question has become impossible to ignore. Dark forest theory reconsidered in 2025. By 2025, conversations about the sphere network began to converge with older, but persistent ideas about how civilizations survive in a wider universe. One of the most frequently invoked is the dark forest theory, first introduced in Liu Cixin's Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, and later adopted as a colloquial model in academic debates over the Fermi paradox. The theory does not present proof about extraterrestrial motives, but it offers a useful speculative framework for imagining why a planetary defense system might exist. In essence, it describes the cosmos as hazardous terrain where survival demands silence. Within this framework, every civilization is both a possible predator and a possible target, and the balance between visibility and concealment becomes existential. These discussions now intersect directly with what is happening above Earth. By mid-2025, the number of active satellites surpassed 11,000, with SpaceX's Starlink alone responsible for around 7,500 of them. Its network supports over 1.5 million subscribers across multiple continents, while competitors like OneWeb, Amazon's Kuiper, and China's Guang constellation speed toward comparable deployment. Analysts project that by 2030, the orbital count could swell to 60,000. This surge represents not simply hardware added to orbit, but an exponential increase in transmission. Consumer internet, navigation systems, environmental monitors, financial data piping, and defense communications. Each piece contributes to what scientists call Earth's broadcast footprint. Put plainly, the planet is louder than it has ever been. Patrick Jackson interprets this expansion as a signal in the dark forest sense. He has often said that large-scale emissions act like beacons, accidental announcements of humanity's existence. While the exact propagation and detectability of these signals is complex and debated, experts agree that today's constellations dramatically increase Earth's radio and laser emission signatures compared with previous decades. Unlike the deliberate messages crafted by SETI experiments, these are unfiltered, round-the-clock transmissions pushed outward not for contact, but as a byproduct of communications infrastructure. If the dark forest model is applied here, then Earth has effectively raised a flare in an environment that rewards silence. That, Jackson cautions, could make us more likely to be noticed by whoever or whatever may already be hiding. The dark forest theory rests on a few simple but unsettling axioms. Survival comes first, resources are finite, trust is impossible, and technological explosions happen so quickly that no civilization can risk assuming another is harmless. The implication is that any civilization revealing its position could become a target simply because a neighbor anticipates the danger of waiting. Earth's own rapid century-long leap from basic combustion engines to reusable rocketry proves the principle of accelerated development. In strategic terms, detection of a new technological society may always trigger preemptive action. Under this logic, silence is not paranoia, it is self-defense. Applied to Earth's 2025 sky, the growing orbit of satellites becomes a strategic vulnerability. Our expanding broadcast footprint fits the exact cautionary tale posed by Liu Cixin's thought experiment. Critics, however, argue that the dark forest framework takes pessimism too far. They point out that the immense distances between stars make interstellar detection and attack extraordinarily difficult. By this reasoning, civilizations could exist in abundance and still never pose any real threat to one another due to insurmountable physical barriers. Others emphasize alternative explanations for the Fermi paradox. The Great Filter theory imagines survival bottlenecks that most societies fail to pass, leaving only a few advanced survivors scattered in quiet. The zoo hypothesis suggests that higher intelligences may practice non-interference, deliberately avoiding contact with Earth, just as humans might leave certain ecosystems untouched. In either case, the conclusion is less predatory than what the dark forest predicts. Yet for those wary of our satellite-driven noise, its framing remains persuasive. If the cosmos punishes disclosure, then humanity is straying dangerously close to advertising itself. It is in this unsettled overlap that the sphere network reappears in debate. Jackson and others suggest the orbs could serve not just as surveillance nodes or local monitors, but as a kind of signal shield. Some analysts argue their microwave bursts and trilateration geometries might do more than map the surface. They could be redirecting or masking emissions, reducing the degree to which Earth advertises itself outward into deep space. In this interpretation, when bursts interfere with radar or radio logs, they are not targeting humans but balancing transmission flow. The hypothesis imagines the network as both firewall and camouflage. No government has publicly confirmed that such damping activity takes place, and skeptics view the idea as highly speculative. But the possibility that the orbs shield Earth from its own broadcast footprint remains a point of ongoing discussion. Linkage between orb appearances and episodes of orbital disruption has fed into such speculation. Several clusters of sightings coincided with satellite collisions or near-miss encounters reported in 2024 and 2025. In some cases, observers described luminous Type 1 patterns forming directly above crowded satellite bands, just as debris hazards were multiplying. Independent radar studies showed unusual emission profiles during those same windows, though interpretation diverges. Jackson believes these signals reveal active intervention, with orbs absorbing or dispersing uncontrolled pulses that might otherwise push deep into interstellar medium. Others counter that such readings can be explained by the chaotic signatures of collisions themselves. With no transparent confirmation, assigning intention remains conjecture. Still, for those who fit the pieces into the dark forest framework, the idea gains traction. Earth's noise problem is being managed from above, without our governments openly admitting it. Later in 2025, the Interstellar Research Group prepared its 9th symposium with the theme Distant Worlds, Neighboring Opportunities. Among the slated discussions is the practical application of the dark forest scenario to interstellar exploration strategies. Academics will present game theory models weighing costs of silence versus disclosure, exploring what stands to be gained or lost when stepping onto the interstellar stage. The debate is abstract, but its timing highlights a strange parallel. While conferences ask whether we should stay quiet, recurring reports describe aerial systems that may already be enforcing quietness, dimming our uncontrolled signals. The possibility that the decision is not in human hands, but in the mechanisms of an unknown network frames the symposium's theme in an unexpectedly direct way. Humanity may debate, but equipment overhead may have already chosen the strategy. The contrast between our expansionist momentum and our silence in the galactic register is striking. From Earth's surface, we see only growth. Private launches accelerating, orbital slots filling, satellites humming with data, and investment pushing the space economy toward $1 trillion within the decade. Yet when viewed through the dark forest lens, we appear as a species unaware of the risks of shouting in an invisible wilderness. Jackson's hypothesis that the sphere network functions as a protective mask is not accepted by mainstream institutions, but many acknowledge the consistency with which sightings align with sensitive orbital corridors. If the orbs are real, and if they serve to manage our emissions, they may represent a compromise between expansion and concealment, allowing our communications to thrive domestically while echoing less forcefully into the void. Where does this leave the debate? In 2025, Earth is both louder and quieter. Louder in the sense that no prior century has produced such heavy volumes of unintentional spaceward broadcast. Quieter in the sense that if the sphere network interferes as suggested by certain analyses, our true signal strength may be damped before it escapes the solar system. On the ground, humanity pushes forward, indifferent to cosmic silence. Above, the possibility exists that some yet unknown system takes on the responsibility of living under dark forest rules, so we do not have to. Whether this arrangement safeguards us or restrains us is impossible to determine. If anything, the effect has been to steer attention toward identifying linkages between known patterns. Who controls orbital signatures, how structured formations appear during moments of risk, and whether these patterns tie to broader system architectures. Those same questions emerge again when considering a particular class of aerial sightings recently revived with new intensity. After years of anecdotal reports, 2023 onward brought a noticeable rise in accounts backed by stronger documentation. Whatever these craft are, witnesses describe their shapes, lights, and movements with increasing clarity. And in 2025, the analysis of these triangular formations has taken on new weight, suggested by some to connect directly with the structured geometries already associated with the sphere network. Triangular craft encounters re-examined. Multiple pilots and credible witnesses, including former Navy aviators, commercial aircrew, and ordinary residents, have reported encounters with triangular aerial objects. These accounts, collected between 2023 and 2025, are better documented than past decades and are supported by video from multiple perspectives, drone sensors, and thermal imaging rather than a single shaky recording. The improvement in documentation has not resolved the debate, but it has made it harder for analysts to dismiss triangular craft as mere misidentifications. Instead, the triangular category has now become a consistent thread in the broader conversation about anomalies linked to the sphere network. One of the most widely discussed of these incidents occurred in Phoenix, Arizona. Residents across several neighborhoods reported a huge, silent triangular craft floating low and moving with deliberate precision. Dozens of witnesses across the city captured footage using phones, security cameras, and dash cams. When compiled, those clips showed a stable triangular outline with 3 distinct points of light that maintained formation for several minutes before slowly fading. For investigators, what made this event notable was less about what it proved than the level of documentation it generated. Having multiple synchronized recordings provided a rare amount of visual context, enough to encourage deeper analysis. Still, experts continue to debate interpretation. Some argue that the Phoenix craft revealed structural geometry consistent with a large constructed object, while others propose unknown atmospheric reflections. Either way, the scale and consistency of that documentation elevated the case into a reference point for current discussion. Reports from professional pilots added another layer of weight. Former Navy fighter pilot Ryan Graves, who has taken an active role in advocating for UAP reporting, relayed testimonies from commercial crews, including a Boeing 737 encounter with a massive black triangular form at around 15,000 feet. According to the account, the craft was larger than the jet itself, flying within only 500 feet. It carried distinct blue lights at its 3 corners and a central violet light, yet no radar system flagged its presence. The aircrew stressed the silence and stability of the object, describing it as nothing like conventional aviation. These details, coming from individuals trained to distinguish atmospheric illusions from real craft, deepen the growing sense that triangular reports belong in serious analysis rather than rumor. Civilian stories have added physical accounts that are striking, but also require caution. Several witnesses standing outdoors described losing all voluntary control when a triangular craft passed overhead. They report that they tried to move and could not, with sensations similar to being locked in place rather than overcome by fear. Others recall a sensation of slowed perception, as though their nervous systems were briefly suspended. These remain subjective reports, not laboratory replications, and they cannot be treated as established medical evidence. What they do offer is a consistent cluster of experiences that appears alongside visual sightings, suggesting an interaction worthy of closer forensic study. The growth of drone technology has also changed the picture. Civilians and research groups alike now operate drones outfitted with thermal infrared cameras. Some of these platforms captured aerial objects that appeared triangular in form, maintaining sharp edges against cooler atmospheric backgrounds. Unlike rounded or elongated jet profiles, these silhouettes were geometric, three-cornered outlines that sometimes held position against strong winds. Some appeared to accelerate rapidly in diagonal paths inconsistent with known aircraft maneuvers. When processed through infrared filters, the heat signatures clearly displayed triangular templates. These recordings matched the visible sightings not just in vague outline, but in sharp, repeating structure. Artificial intelligence has been brought into play on these datasets. Civilian investigators and research coalitions ran automated pattern recognition software against hours of drone video, civilian skywatching feeds, and even scattered satellite records. The software flagged repeating triangular geometries across independent sources. The same three-point arrangement emerged in different regions, months apart, in footage captured by unrelated devices. The finding does not prove intent, but it lends weight to claims of repeatability. The software caught patterns that may have been dismissed as coincidence had humans viewed them individually. Supporters call this significant. Critics point out that pattern matching can generate false positives, and they emphasize the need for independent replication. Both sides agree that the scale of consistent returns makes the subject worthy of more structured study. This raises the interpretive question: where do triangular objects fit into the broader system, described as the sphere network? Patrick Jackson's model has long emphasized layered geometries in orbit, particularly Type 1 formations composed of three spheres fixed in triangular alignment. When one compares those orbital arrangements with recordings of triangular craft seen at lower altitude, the similarity in geometry becomes undeniable. Both rely on three equidistant nodes maintaining steady spacing in order to map and stabilize an area between them. Triangular craft hovering in atmosphere may function on the same logic: temporary anchor points arranged to hold formation while interacting with surface events. Some sightings even suggest a chronological connection. In accounts across North America and South America, people reported smaller glowing orbs, what Jackson calls Type 3, hovering close to settlements or infrastructure. Hours later, triangular shapes were documented higher in the sky above the same regions. The sequence creates the impression of layered escalation, as if local orbs activity was amplified by a larger triangular array above. One possible interpretation is that triangles are not hulled vehicles, but arrangements of luminous nodes that, when aligned, give the visual impression of a dark craft with fixed edges. To the naked eye, they resemble a solid body. To analysts comparing geometries, they appear to be structural constellations within the larger grid. Witness sensations of paralysis or field effects also share parallels with reported orb encounters. In both categories, the hover of triangular forms and the presence of Type 3 spheres, people describe disorientation or momentary loss of control. The shared overlap suggests that the same processes might underlie both phenomena. Jackson has speculated that microwave or gamma bursts used for trilateration could incidentally affect human physiology. Under this hypothesis, triangular manifestations would simply be another recurrence of emissions observed during other sphere activity. Again, these are theories grounded in interpretation, not confirmed experiments, but the consistency in testimony cannot be ignored. Researchers reviewing photographic evidence have noted that recorded triangular outlines appear at a consistent scale. They do not vary wildly from one case to the next. This peculiarity led some to propose that the forms conform to a template, repeating globally with only minor deviation. Network logic would demand such redundancy. Fixed distances between nodes create predictable coverage patterns. What appears as a giant craft the same size across continents may simply reflect repeated architecture deployed for functional reliability. To witnesses below, the template produces not abstract geometry, but the illusion of an immense black triangle blocking portions of the sky. In 2025, the volume of these reports created a sharper frame. With civilian thermal drones, AI analysis, testimony from pilots, and wide-angle reports from heavily populated cities like Phoenix, the triangular category of sightings now commands recognition. But interpretation remains contested. Some believe these are distinct vehicles. Others argue they are nothing more than optical phenomena. Jackson's hypothesis suggests they belong to the same multi-layered system as the other spheres, temporary formations highlighting the mechanics of trilateration, glimpsed at lower altitude. This synthesis is plausible, particularly when aligned with ongoing orb sightings, but it is not yet a settled conclusion. For researchers and the public following these cases, the key point is consistency. Whether triangles are vehicles or manifestations, they recur with predictable structure. Their presence ties to other luminous formations and likely operates in relation to the complicated global system we now see more frequently. If they are indeed part of the same network, suggests Jackson, then the system is becoming more visible than ever before. For critics, that very visibility demands caution. Repeatability deserves study, but extraordinary claims about network integration must not leap ahead of the data. As these triangular cases circulated widely in 2025, they added pressure to an already crowded debate about what humanity is seeing above its skies. Reports of structured formations repeat across regions, and each one raises new questions about how this system responds to human expansion in orbit. That expansion continued relentlessly into mid-2025, bringing new circumstances that would soon reshape baseline assumptions about who monitors space and what consequences follow. The increased activity of 2025. By 2025, the tempo of space activity reached levels without precedent. What had once been an environment where occasional launches stood out as major events became a routine procession of flights to place satellites into orbit. Tracking sources confirmed that by mid-year there were more than 11,000 functioning satellites, with projections of 50,000 by the end of the decade. Starlink alone contributed the majority, with roughly 7,500 units in service. Amazon's Project Kuiper began deploying its first production models. BAE Systems expanded its Azalea cluster, and AST Space Mobile prepared the next wave of Bluebird satellites. China's Thousands Sails constellation added hundreds of vehicles with the aim of having 648 in orbit by year's end. The larger picture was no longer about isolated missions but about saturation. Bands of low Earth orbit filled as every commercial and state actor raced to occupy slots. The acceleration of launches underscored that shift. In 2024, analysts logged 259 global launch attempts, an 18% rise from the previous year. The United States carried out most of them, with 154 flights, and SpaceX alone flew 90. Projections for 2025 indicated more than 300 orbital launches worldwide, the FAA issuing up to 172 commercial licenses in anticipation. SpaceX's forthcoming approval for about 24 Starship launches promised a further disruption, with its heavy lift capacity threatening to transform cadence and distribution entirely. Observers remarked that there was no longer any sense of space as a scarce frontier. It had become a grid-like operational zone, congested, layered, and bristling with machines. What stood out to those following the Sphere network were the correlations. Observers reported Sphere sightings coincident with major deployment windows, particularly when large batches of satellites entered orbit. During one Kuiper release in South America, multiple independent logs described lights in stable formations above the launch corridor, spaced in equilateral patterns. Sailors in the Pacific later recorded similar lights after Chinese Thousands Sails deployments, describing objects that seemed to glide silently higher than conventional craft could reach. Independent analysts flagged such clusters as intriguing correlations between launch bursts and localized sightings, though whether these were coincidence or something more systematic remains an open question. The pattern also surfaced around military activity. New maneuverable spacecraft, engineered to refuel in orbit and extend their operational lifetime, were tested in 2025. At the same time, radar specialists flagged anomalous returns not tied to any catalog debris or known mission. Several accounts described Type 1 like geometries positioned above the altitude bands of those trials. To some researchers, this resemblance suggested that the spheres appeared in response to new technology, arranging themselves as if to measure or constrain it. Critics cautioned that these returns might reflect unrelated interference or atmospheric phenomena. Still, the overlap between untested craft and Luminous observations gave weight to the perception that human innovation was shadowed by another layer of monitoring. Collisions pushed the discussion further. With orbit more crowded than ever, the margin for error shrank, and 2025 brought several close calls. When a defunct Russian satellite fragment broke apart after impact, Central Asia residents reported orbs hovering in triangular alignment above the relevant band within hours. Amateur astronomers captured video of 3 points holding station before disappearing. Some claimed background noise and signal readings dropped more sharply than anticipated following the event, as though energy had been absorbed or redirected. Others argued that such measurements could be explained by the chaotic nature of collisions themselves. The crucial fact remains. Observers claimed orbs appeared at the same time as the debris, but official orbital monitoring agencies have not validated these associations. They remain intriguing, not confirmed. SpaceX's Starship tests amplified visibility further. With approval for major launches in 2025, Starship was the largest vehicle in decades and represented a revolution in orbital logistics. Witnesses noted that during heavy payload missions, arcs of luminous objects were recorded in the upper atmosphere within minutes of ascent. These did not match booster trajectories. They followed independent paths, appearing in steady formations characteristic of Type 1 arrangements in earlier models. A few orbital analysts argued that the timing reinforced the theme. Wherever human launch capacity surged in scale or intensity, orbs seemed to manifest in parallel. Others stressed that no official agency acknowledged such links, meaning the phenomenon stood as a striking correlation rather than established cause. For those mapping data across years, what emerged was a repeating pattern. The louder Earth's orbital corridor became, the more consistently spheres were logged. Observers noted that in the early 2010s sphere reports were sporadic, occasional lights dismissed as anecdote. By 2025, every surge of satellite launches and every significant collision seemed to carry a parallel anecdotal record of luminous appearances. In that frame, human activity acts as a stimulus. New transmissions, expanded constellations, and stronger propulsion trigger observable responses. Whether this represents surveillance or protection depends on interpretation, but the adaptive quality appears consistent. The debate grew sharper as governments advanced norms aimed at preventing orbital debris. The United States had already banned destructive anti-satellite tests in 2022 and urged allies to follow suit. Official narratives framed this as responsible stewardship, ensuring orbital sustainability for all actors. But for those studying the sphere sightings, the policy read differently. If a non-human grid responds visibly to collision risks, then restraint might not only be altruistic, but also practical self-preservation. A fragmented orbit could trigger direct intervention. From that perspective, bans look not just diplomatic, but precautionary against provoking unknown systems. Commercial constellations underscored the point. As Starlink passes thickened across populated corridors, a rising number of observers described faint orb presences near malfunctioning satellites or during orbital raises. These were not satellites, motion was too agile, and disappearance was too abrupt. Timing seemed linked to moments of abnormal transmission or mechanical error. To independent researchers, this suggested the system could remain involved not only during launches, but across the life cycle of satellite operations, monitoring ongoing emissions and failures. Again, cautious reviewers stress that this claim lacks verified data, but the repeated eyewitness accounts made the association difficult to ignore. By the middle of 2025, the impression left on investigators was of a cycle. Humanity expands capabilities, orbital volume grows, incidents spike, and luminous formations reappear. Whether the network shields us from hazards or watches us for compliance, the practical overlap remains visible and persistent. Each burst of deployment, each test flight or failure, seems to bring back the same geometric traces overhead. That repeatability, even when still unverified by official agencies, starts to define orbital activity itself. With so many correlations stacking up, a deeper unease followed. What happens when governments not only notice but potentially act with this reality in mind? The question turned less on whether the spheres exist, and more on how states interpret their persistence. For some observers, the possibility arose that authorities might already adjust actions, policies, or even strategies to align with the patterns. Others went further, asking whether quiet coordination could already be taking place. If the network emerges predictably in step with our advances, then logic suggests that human planners are not only watching, but perhaps engaging with it in ways not publicly admitted. It is at this point that speculation began moving into a new dimension. The recurring alignments no longer looked like isolated anomalies, but like operational intersections that might involve more than coincidence. And as accounts of official activity on the ground and in orbital corridors accumulated, questions sharpened. Could governments be doing more than simply tracking? Could they, in select cases, already be cooperating? Government collaboration evidence. There are conflicting threads driving this discussion. On one side, whistleblowers and independent investigators claim quiet collaboration, restricted operations, and even structured meetings between official agencies and the Sphere network. On the other, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, and senior Space Force officials maintain that no verifiable evidence of extraterrestrial technology has ever been found. Congressional hearings in 2023 and 2024 underscored this point, with AARO leadership reiterating that while UAP monitoring is ongoing, discoveries have not extended into proof of non-human craft or partnerships. This tension, between public denials and private claims, frames the evidence of possible collaboration in 2025. Public documents provide some anchors. In March 2025, the Space Force released its Data and Artificial Intelligence FI 2025 Strategic Action Plan, a roadmap detailing how AI would be integrated across operations. The plan focused on 4 major lines of effort: strengthening data governance, building AI literacy and culture, rapidly adopting advanced analytics, and expanding partnerships with allies and industry. Officially, the plan aimed at competing with rivals like China and ensuring reliable space domain awareness. Yet to those following Sphere sightings, the timing was notable. The most ambitious AI adoption push in Space Force history came at the very moment Orb reports spiked globally. To some observers, the parallel suggested that AI was not just about efficiency, but might be the only way to process the complexity of unexplained aerial and orbital patterns. A coincidence difficult to ignore but never officially acknowledged. Beyond official plans, allegations surfaced of closed-door sessions at restricted sites. Whistleblowers described unexplained scheduling anomalies where facilities were suddenly shuttered without public notice. One cited a meeting where not all attendees carried standard military identification, instead resembling contractors from major aerospace firms. Media reporting also noted facility closures documented through leaked schedules, but without formal explanation. Importantly, these stories remain unverified. No public government record confirms such meetings, and officials have not addressed the claims directly. Still, to researchers, the secrecy hinted at compartmentalized engagement. If tunnels and underground networks truly intersect with surface bases, as some independent teams argue, hidden sections of major facilities could already function as controlled contact points. Anonymous testimony in early 2025 added fuel to this narrative. A whistleblower under protection described alleged underground chambers linked to established defense installations, with reinforced corridors leading to geometric vaults faintly lit by orb-like glows. According to the account, access was restricted to select units, and equipment routinely malfunctioned near the chambers. Crucially, the testimony claimed these events were scheduled rather than accidental, treated internally as part of routine operations. While impossible to independently validate, portions of the testimony echoed descriptions of scorched tunnels reported in Utah and Argentina. To critics, the overlap may illustrate a storytelling pattern. To believers, it suggests convergence between independent finds and insider leaks. Civilian observers also presented footage that fueled perceptions of collaboration. In one case, daytime recordings showed a Type II orb maintaining position above a transmission tower, while uniformed personnel, bearing what appeared to be Space Force insignia, stood quietly nearby. Witnesses noted that the personnel did not panic, shout warnings, or display weapons. They remained calm until the orb departed. The inference, that the troops knew such appearances were expected, was hard for locals to dismiss. A key caveat must be added. This footage is compelling for investigators, but does not equal a formal admission. Agencies rarely reference such deployments, leaving the scenes ambiguous. Another example came from Eastern Europe, where a triangular aerial formation was filmed at high altitude. Concurrently, the ground displayed arrays of portable sensors aligned precisely beneath the luminous geometry overhead. Later that night, military convoys withdrew. Researchers mapping ground layouts against the recorded formation found striking alignment, as though terrestrial instruments were linked with the aerial pattern. To some, it looked like coordinated testing with non-human craft. To skeptics, it was advanced human monitoring wrongly conflated with mystery lights. Regardless of interpretation, the sight of machines above and military units below working in apparent tandem added to the sense of alignment between the system and official actors. Patterns of synchronized timing heightened suspicion. Orb sightings often coincided with declared military exercises. During one Pacific missile detection drill, witnesses described glowing formations above restricted airspace routes, not visible on public schedules. To critics, this could be coincidence, but to researchers it suggested orbs had foreknowledge of classified drills. If true, it would imply integration deeper than surface monitoring, perhaps as built-in participants in detection routines. Even those who remain skeptical concede the coincidence rate appears high enough to warrant further verification. Throughout these developments, skeptics emphasize caution. Footage is often grainy. Uniforms can be misread. Leaks may exaggerate or misrepresent facility operations. The most consistent pushback comes from ARO, which restates in congressional testimony that while UAPs are tracked, analysis has uncovered no evidence of extraterrestrial materials or systems. Officials frame ongoing AI adoption as a pragmatic response to information overload in orbit, not an attempt to collaborate with non-human intelligences. On the other side, whistleblowers and independent groups argue that compartmentalization enables a quiet reality to proceed without congressional or public oversight. Both threads persist in parallel, each building its own credibility base. The most plausible interpretation may rest in the middle ground. Agencies undeniably enhance anomaly detection through AI and integrated monitoring. These steps are documented in official strategy papers. Whistleblowers provide striking descriptions that, even if exaggerated, consistently claim routine engagement behind closed doors. Civilians frequently document strange overlaps, personnel stationed near orbs, ground arrays aligning with sky formations, or sightings mapped onto scheduled drills. None of these proves collaboration, but together they sketch a picture that feels more like operational coexistence than outright denial. For viewers following this debate, evidence remains inconclusive and requires restraint. Eyewitness footage is meaningful, but only when reviewed with forensic care. Metadata must be checked, timestamps verified, and the chain of custody preserved. Without those steps, even the most extraordinary video can collapse under scrutiny, discrediting the broader field. The practical takeaway is that citizen investigators play a role in strengthening the record, but credibility hinges on disciplined documentation. As all these threads circulate in 2025, from AI roadmaps to whistleblower claims, field footage to official denial, they create a composite impression. Public language avoids drama, maintaining that anomalies are unknown but terrestrial explanations remain more likely. Private accounts press the opposite, describing structured dialogues hidden beneath facilities or in contested airspace. The truth may lie between, in a gray area of recognition and adaptation without open disclosure. What matters is that the pattern now invites a reevaluation of the entire phenomenon. Official strategies, leaked testimonies, and filmed events no longer exist as isolated oddities. Together they shape a narrative of systems intersecting at multiple levels. The question is not yet resolved, but the direction begins to point away from myth and towards something structured, persistent, and significant. That recognition sets the stage for an even larger reflection on where this leaves humanity and what role, if any, the spheres play in its future. By 2025, the sphere network concept moved from fringe theory toward a subject of serious public debate. Rising civilian reports, congressional hearings where ARO repeated denials, and the U.S. Space Force's FY 2025 data and AI Strategic Action Plan highlighted how official monitoring now treats anomalies as part of operational space awareness. Meanwhile, criminal engineering of cross-border smuggling tunnels showed what verifiable underground construction looks like, distinct from claims of ultra-terrestrial facilities. What remains unresolved is intent. If you have clear footage with timestamps and metadata, add it to public maps and link it in the comments. Investigators need verifiable files. Share respectfully, question critically, and keep discussion grounded in evidence.